we live? That's the question. Hopefully we are. Anyway, so this evening I'm going to be painting my Death Corps of Krieg. I've got my little test model here. I've just given him some base coats and a little bit of a clean up. Still needs some work done to him, but the basic colour scheme is okay. I'm not a Citadel paint user, so I tend to prefer Pro Acryl. So that's what I'm going to be using this evening. For his main jacket colour, I'm using Pro Acryl's Blue Black. And then for the flaps on the inside of his jacket, which you can see here, I'm going to be using that mixed pretty much one-to-one with Vallejo's Stonewall Grey. This gives a nice sort of lighter blue without taking out too much saturation. Then the majority of him is painted then in coal black. You can see it's quite a matte colour, so it's just one of those things. And yeah, that's pretty much it. For his legs, for the gaiters, I'm using the dark green brown by Pro Acryl, and I'm also highlighting that up with dark ivory, and then give it a little bit of a wash over with some Skeleton Horde. Big fan of Citadel's contrast paints. I can kind of live without their normal paints. I just find them sometimes they're a little bit inconsistent. So that's what we're going to be aiming for today. So let's put him to one side. Let's put him up there. And then let's grab one of my Krieg guys who is sitting here. So here we go. Standard Krieg Guardsmen. If you've never built Krieg before, they can be very, very fiddly. If I just zoom in on him, you can see him a bit better. The biggest problem with them is you can see his bayonet sticking out the front there. That can be a right pain to actually stick on. It actually comes separate from the gun, so it's your choice whether you want them on or not. With the build guide, if you actually build them as per the instructions, either as the Guardsman box of 40k or as the kill team, you'll notice that if they don't have a bayonet on the back on their rifle, they tend to have the bayonet on their back there, just off the bottom of their backpack. Bit hard to see because it's black, but once we get some colour on there, that will start to stand out a little bit better. Anyway, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a slightly large brush. In fact, I'm going to go for, what's this, a size 4. And I'm going to give it a liberal painting all over, using the Pro Acryl black blue. Just moisten my brush up a little bit first, and then I'm just going to grab some of that off of my palette. I personally use a wet palette, just because I find it easier to you know, on a long painting session, it keeps it going. This goes on pretty well, and I'm just going to kind of go right the way around it. I'm not going to worry too much about going over some of the details because we can pick those back out a bit later on. And also for the flaps that are folded back, you know, they're going to be a lighter blue anyway, so it makes sense to give it an undercoat of the black blue, because then if you do happen to just slightly miss something, it's not going to look too garish with just the black poking through. The blue will actually pull it over for you. Now, one of the things I've done with these guys is you can see I've actually fully assembled them, and they are, or can be, quite awkward to paint underneath their arms. For my other Krieg Guardsmen, who are currently being assembled, I've kept the arms off just to make painting a lot easier. But it's your choice, you know. I've never had particularly good eyesight, So I do wear some of those really gimpy looking glasses that magnify everything when I'm actually painting stuff. I don't actually have them on at the moment because I'm using a big fat brush and it doesn't matter too much. But, you know, once I get to the finer details, I'll want to focus up a little bit. And unfortunately, my old eyes just aren't what they were. So, let me just get that in. Now, the thing about the Guardsmen, and I suppose a lot of people, when they're painting to play and not painting to display, you can get bogged down with these guys, just putting in too much detail and effort. You know, realistically, you've got to remember these things are going to be seen from about 3 feet or approximately a metre away most of the time by your opponent and even yourself. So, you know, it's not an up close and personal like it is now, where you can see it quite clearly on the screen, you know. So don't be too worried about, you know, just how much detail you need to get on these guys. You know, they come in a squad of 10, so you really want to crack through them as fast as you can. Right, let's put him to one side. Let's grab another one. Now, in case you're wondering, I actually have magnets on the bottom of all of mine. Good old war magnets. And then what I've done on my red grass games painting handle is I've got some little stick-on magnetic discs, metal discs, sorry. And then I just plonk him on top. He's not going to fall off. The pull on the actual magnet itself is pretty good. So, you know, you can get fairly robust with your painting technique. And it's not going to knock him off. Obviously, when you get to slightly bigger models, you've got to be a little bit more careful, because obviously the weight of them versus the magnet that is actually under the base can be a little bit disproportionate. So let's just get him going. You know, and the thing about, I don't know what it is about the Krieg, but they really just speak to me. I think it's that whole World War I aesthetic. You know, the whole gas mask, it's almost like there's a little bit of anonymity there. You don't know really what's under there, under the mask. I mean, we do know that they're humanoids, you know, and humans in general. But it's kind of a bit like stormtroopers in Star Wars. Yeah, up until the more recent movies, you know, and before the prequels came along, it was always questionable about what did they actually look like under their helmet. You know, and I remember many years ago playing Star Wars, the role-playing game by Mayfair Games, and even in their Imperial Handbook, they never gave any details as to what a stormtrooper looked like if you took his helmet off. So you can imagine, you know, a lot of young role players, first thing they do once they shoot a stormtrooper, take the helmet off and gleefully look at their DM and go, what does the stormtrooper look like? And the more curt and focused GMs would normally turn around and just say, well, it looks like a stormtrooper. You know, some people might just describe him as a normal person, because of course back then it wasn't particularly clear what the Clone Wars was beyond what was explained. So you know, that's one of the things that appeals to me. And like I say, you know, that whole World War I sort of in the trenches fighting hand to hand type aesthetic is very cool. But you know, each to their own. If you're not a massive fan of Krieg and you're more of a Space Marine type person, then good on you. Personally, I actually play Necrons the vast majority of the time, but I have had this urge for a very long time, since I first sort of read about the Krieg and saw some of the artwork for them, to grab myself some. But I wasn't going to pay Forge World prices for them. But fortunately, G-Dubs for once did us all a solid and released a load of them in plastic, and that's continued to grow to this day. And like I say, I've got a massive great brush. There's going to be a little bit of overspill. Don't get hung up on it. You know, we're painting these so that we can get them on the tabletop. That doesn't mean being sloppy, but you know, pick your battles. Let's plonk him down. In actual fact, I think the first one I did, yeah, I thought I did. I've got to do his legs. Look, his legs are still black. So we're going to get rid of those and give them a coating of paint. Now this is kind of similar to one of the Krieg colour schemes that you will see in the Astra Militarum Codex, or you know, in a lot of the artwork, that sort of blue uniform. Now, a lot of people assume that the Krieg, because of their overall aesthetic, you know, that they're based on the German forces from World War One. Well, they kind of are, but it's a bit of an amalgam, really. You know, the colour of their uniform is more similar to the French or the Belgians during the First World War. And the gas masks, yeah, you know, they were pretty much ubiquitous across all the forces, both the, you know, the Allied and I suppose they called them Axis back then as well. Not particularly sure, but, you know, I think the thing that really sticks out that people associate with them being sort of inspired by the Germans of that period is the helmet. That sort of open-faced, sort of round-rimmed, punched helmet, very much like those worn by the Germans in the First World War, and then refined to something much more recognisable during the Second World War. I mean, they're not identical. The German helmets didn't look that dissimilar during the First World War to those in the Second World War. You imagine it's only, what, 20-odd years between the two, unfortunately. But yeah, you know, read into it what you will. I know a lot of people sort of make those comparisons. To me, they just look cool. I like their colour scheme. I like the overall sort of lore of them. So I thought, why not? Now that we've got more plastic Krieg minis, let's put some together and build an army out of it. Although, if you are thinking of investing in Krieg, or any Astra Militarum really, be prepared that it's it can be quite expensive, just purely down to the fact that they're very, very low in points. So you've got to buy an awful lot of units. And if you were lucky enough to get one of the Battleforce boxes that went up to pre-order the other week, you know, well done, congrats. If you got the Battleforce box you wanted, nice. I was lucky enough, I got the Krieg one, so I'm happy. I also got the Krieg Army box when it first came out with the limited cover Astra Militarum Codex. So I've been furiously building my Krieg on and off for a while now. These ones in particular are actually 2 units from Kill Team. So you're going to see some of the models here wouldn't be loadouts in 40k, just because as it currently stands they don't really add any benefit to your units, or have any proper rules for them. But you know, you can always proxy those, it's not a biggie. So let's just plonk him down. Kind of cracking through these. So here's one of the spotters. Not to be confused with the sniper. I don't know where the sniper is at the moment, but I'm sure he will appear at some point. I mean, some of these models you can fully assemble because they're fairly open. This one is a prime example of that. And you can pretty much get to everything you need to get to fairly easily. If you are new to painting minis, you know, and you've just got into Warhammer, whether that's Age of Sigmar or 40k, one of the things is, you know, people worry sometimes that they're going to ruin their minis if they do a poor paint job. At the end of the day, practice will improve your painting skill, and you shouldn't worry too much. Everybody has horrible minis that they originally painted because they just didn't have much brush control. They, you know, weren't sure how to thin their paints properly. All that type of stuff. So, you know, you kind of got to be aware that it's like riding a bike. You're not going to be, you know, El Miniaturista or, you know, the guys, Andy Wardle, those type of guys overnight. They've been painting for 10, 15, 20 odd years. You know, most of them are professional miniature painters. That's what they do as their day job. You know, they're commission painters, and, you know, they've built their skills. The more you paint, the better you'll get. It's plain and simple. So, you know, don't be put off. You've got to start somewhere. Just start whacking down paint, and eventually you'll start to get the muscle memory in your hand. You worry about the whole shaking thing with the brush. That's muscle memory. It's not some weird nervous thing. It is literally because you are trying to learn a new fine motor skill that you don't normally do. You know, think about when you're at school and you first sort of started to learn how to write. I know for a lot of us that's a very, very long time ago. But you know, when you were first doing those, following the shapes and looping your characters and stuff like that, it seems so hard, and you ended up with cramp in your hands because your hand just wasn't used to doing that. It wasn't used to that micro movements and that muscle memory. And then as you got older and you did it more and practiced more, you know, it all becomes second nature. You don't think about how to shape letters now or how to use and hold a pen. And it's the same with a paintbrush, you know. And as long as you keep your paint fairly thin, yeah, when you're painting your models, there is nothing that you can do to a mini paint-wise that you couldn't correct. You know, and if it goes horribly, horribly wrong and you really hate everything about it, there are ways to strip the paint off, you know, and redo it. So don't worry about it. Just jump in there, start painting, and away you go. Now, I suppose that leads quite neatly on to paint brands. You know, the vast majority of us started out using Citadel paints. I remember when I first got into painting miniatures many, many, many years ago, that, you know, Citadel only had a tiny little range. I think it was like 9 paints. I first started painting my minis using Humbrol enamels. Because that's kind of, you know, you are coming from that Airfix, Tamiya sort of, you know, traditional model making side of the fence, you know. So you're using all of their tools and all of their paints. And, you know, back then all the miniatures were white metal of some description, you know, either pewter based or that they were you know, lead or some form of, you know, soft metal. So enamels worked very well because they adhered to the metal surface and cured nicely. And yeah, acrylics just weren't a thing, really. They weren't easily accessible like enamels were. But of course, there's an awful lot of cleanup and everything you need to do with enamels, and fixing mistakes, horrendous mistakes, is not an easy thing, because stripping them requires quite noxious chemicals. Anywho, so this is one of the guys, sort of the specialists that you can have in your Krieg Guardsmen. So this is the guy with the flamer. A very, very cool model. You know, just the sculpt is beautiful. You know, the action pose is really cool, and just the way that the whole thing holds together, you know, just so cool. Probably one of my favourites. I mean, you know, you've got the other guys. So your the Krieg, I think it's called the Krieg Watchmaster, who is the kind of like the sergeant equivalent for the guardsman. You know, he can have a sword or a chainsword and some form of hand weapon. So either a bolt pistol or a plasma pistol or a las pistol. You know, Krieg by default, as most Astra Militarum, their default go-to weapon is the las rifle. You know, you will see these sort of special weapons guys, but the vast majority of them will be carrying las rifles into combat. Oh, dearie me. We'll fix that in a bit. I think one of the interesting things, and always, you know, sparks furious debate, is to do with whether or not certain factions have both genders. Now, obviously, it's all kicked off in recent weeks, months, God knows how long, within Space Marines and Custodes. And we now know Custodes do have both male and female members of their faction, which is cool. Why shouldn't they? I suppose the thing about Krieg is they all wear gas masks. So it's quite difficult to work out whether or not any of these models are, in actual fact, you know, male or female. I mean, so the natural assumption is that they're all male, but who knows? You know, the Astra Militarum has a very high percentage of female soldiers, so it wouldn't be unheard of. I'd be very surprised if there were just male Krieg fighters, because they certainly do seem to be a very sort of not warmongery, but you know what I mean, aggressive, I suppose would be an easier way to describe it, type of unit. Right, I think we're rapidly approaching, I've got a couple more just to put some base colour onto, but we're rapidly approaching the point of switching from a slightly oversized brush to something that we can then start to clean this stuff up with. So let's dump him down there. Excuse me. Right, I've got a couple more. I do have a load more sitting off to the side, but I think what we'll do is we'll cycle through these ones first, and once we get them all to a certain level, we can then cycle back round to the other ones and start blocking them up as well. So for all the new painters out there, there is a there's kind of two schools of thought when it comes to painting miniatures. There are those that block, so whereby you just effectively paint in the base colours of your miniature, so the whole thing is covered in paint, and then you start to layer it up, so you have everything basically being lifted at the same time. And then there are the other school of thought, which is that you paint a particular part of your model first, generally the largest area, or the thing that has the biggest coverage, and then you will layer that up and highlight it so that it is effectively finished. And then off the back of that, you then move on to the next bit. There's no right way, there's no wrong way of doing that. You know, for me, I tend to switch between the two. So, you know, each to their own. Some models lend themselves well to the approach of finishing certain parts of the model off completely before moving on to another part. Others lend themselves better to just being painted up in blocks. I think it all comes down to what you're aiming to get out of your mini. You know, if you're painting to a more from a competition point of view, you know, as a display model, then you're going to want to take your time and probably build up each of those sections as you go, and then you can kind of fix the errors as you move along. It does take longer because, you know, these are primed in black, so, you know, if we were going to tidy this up so that we could finish this one section off, we basically re-black all of the areas that aren't currently being painted, so that we had a clean area, so that we had the definition around where it begins and ends. Whereby if we just block it all in, then we can kind of clean it up as we go. Sometimes we might actually paint it so it's black, or other times we may, you know, just leave it as, because we know we're coming over the top. So it's one of those things. Right, I'm just going to quickly check something. So while I'm just doing this, bear with me. Just going to go to here, see what we're doing. Oh, cool. Yes, we are live. Sorry, I didn't even bother checking before I even started. So it is what it is. Right. Sorry for that mild intermission. Okay, so we've fairly blocked these guys in. Let's kick him off, and then we've got one more. And this guy's a demo guy. I don't believe he is part of the special unit makeup of the Guardsmen in 40k. I think he is kill team specific, but he looks cool, you know. So let's paint him up anyway, because we can always proxy him for somebody else. He's got a las rifle on his back, so you know, just because he's kneeling down and he's got a demolition pack on him, you know, as long as he's got the relevant loadout, I don't think anyone's going to complain. So now, I suppose one thing worth chatting about is, you know, paint consistency. We were talking earlier about Citadel, and then I got slightly waylaid with Humbrol enamels. So, you know, Citadel released acrylics back in, it must have been about 86, 87, something like that. and they came in a box of, if memory serves, 9. And you know, this is where the original sort of Goblin Green and stuff like that came from, that a lot of people have very strong nostalgia for. You know, and I can remember painting the bases of many a D&D figure that I had done a little bit of a kit bash on with Citadel paints, mainly because I used to, my original painting area when I was a wee lad was a built-in wardrobe that had the door taken off of it and a shelf put in it, so that I could use that like a desk to model on. You know, I was playing D&D at the time. I didn't play Warhammer Fantasy or anything like that when I first got into it. And it was back in the days when Games Workshop were, you know, a distributor for various other game systems. You know, my jam was Dungeons and Dragons and Call of Cthulhu, with a bit of Paranoia thrown in. You know, they had lots of miniatures, but they weren't really focused on any particular fantasy game, so to speak, at that point in time. You know, they had figures that were licensed for specific games that they did, like Judge Dredd. You know, they did a lot of figures and stuff like that. Call of Cthulhu, which is sort of set in the 1920s. But you know, Warhammer didn't turn, or Warhammer 40k, should I say, didn't turn up until 87. You know, and the figures then were, you know, the much talked about Ep.1, which were the first Space Marines. And they are tiny compared to the Primaris modern scale Space Marines that we're used to seeing now. But anyway, I digress. So, you know, I started using Citadel paint. I do still have an unopened pot of Skull, I think it's Skull White, which came in that set all the way back in the mid-80s. It sort of slops about when you shake it, so it's probably still usable. But who knows? Right, I'm going to switch brushes now. I'm just going to clean this one off. I suppose I should say at this point, as we're what, half an hour in, you know, if you enjoy my rambling, you know, with my my maiden live stream, then, you know, hit a like, hit subscribe if you're watching it after the fact. I hope it's not too boring or drony, and thanks for making it this far at least. You know, that's always a bonus. And hopefully you'll stick around till the end. I'm going to live stream probably for a couple of hours, try and get as much of these done as possible, and see where we're at. Okay, so I've now painted all the ones that were sitting in front of me. So we've got 2, 4, 6, 8 of them, and there's probably about another 9, 10 of them to my left. I've switched brushes, so I've now gone down to a size 1, so I can get a little bit closer. For those interested, these are Pro Art Kalinsky Sable. Personally, I only almost exclusively paint with Kalinsky Sable brushes, just because I've used them for so many years. I just like the way that they flow. I do have some synthetics. I don't particularly like them. They're generally used for things and then chucked, because you'll suffer from hooking. If you've not come across hooking before, with a natural hairbrush, you know, it will, as long as you look after it, clean it, and put some sort of conditioning on it when you finish using it, it will last you a very, very long time. Synthetic brushes, because of their lack of ability to absorb and hold water the same way as natural hair does, because of under the microscopic level, they look like someone's just exploded, you know, a ball of elastic bands, compared to hairs, which, if you've ever seen a hair under the microscope, you know, it's sort of got edges that protrude in sections as the hair is growing, and that helps to absorb the water and retain, you know, that nice point that we've got here. So the hooking happens because the brush itself just naturally starts to bend because of the synthetic nature of the fibers, because they start to pull in one direction. Unfortunately, once it starts to hook, the brush is pretty much done in relation to a sharp point. It's just one of those things. So you've got a couple of choices with it. Then you can either keep it as a sort of a stirring brush, you know, for doing stuff like mixing, you know, or as some sort of cleaner or a dry brushing brush, you know, or you can, you know, be more drastic and sort of hack the end of it off with a sharp modelling knife, and have a less refined brush, but at least it'll have some use. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just blocking in the bits around the back that I didn't get to with my exceedingly oversized size 4, but that it worked okay. Like I said, I'm not worried about getting paint on the helmet, things like that, because I can come in and clean that up in a minute. I'm more interested in getting into these finer areas that are going to be difficult to come back into, you know, at a later date. So let's just have a look. So I'm going to go and clear up some of these edges, because obviously having a larger brush, it does cover a lot of areas, but it can be a little bit on the messy side. So one thing you can see here on this guardsman is that you can actually see the front of his jacket here. So we're just going to go in there, you know, and coming back to brushes. So the thing about the paintbrush is, to paint a fine area, you don't have to have painfully thin brush tip. If you do, if you have one like, so what is this? This is a 00. You want the belly of the brush to be fairly long. What you don't want is, you don't want a stubby little fine brush that's about a third of the length of this, because what happens is that it doesn't hold enough moisture in the belly when it's that short, and therefore it's drying. The paint is evaporating the moment that you put it on it, and by the time you actually come to your model to paint on it, that could have evaporated on the tip, and then you're basically scrubbing paint onto your mini. So you're going to get things like lines and scratch marks, and it's just going to give a very inconsistent surface. The other thing you want to do is, as you can see here, is avoid pulling paint all the way into the belly of the brush and down to the ferrule. I'm sure you all know this anyway, but the advantage of it here is, if you can keep it just in the belly will swell up with the moisture, and the paint, it will pull it into itself. And even though it doesn't look like there's a lot of paint on there, there is, and you can go for quite a while before you then need to reload. You know, avoid, if you can't see the tip of your paintbrush in the same manner that you would when it has no paint on it at all, then you've got too much paint on there, and you're going to end up blobbing on your model, and trying to clear that off can be quite painful. Now I know I keep going back to my palette, and I've done it twice now while talking, because the tip will be drying while I'm just standing there holding it. But, you know, you can see. So you can get very, very fine detail work here because the tip springs back. And, as long as you keep it moist, and don't forget to move your model around. Your model doesn't have to stay on the same plane as you. Yeah, it doesn't have to stay like that. You want to put your painting handle upside down so you can get to something a bit easier. So, for example, you see the line around the top of his boots here? Now, I could paint that the right way up, but just as an illustrative point, the Red Grass Games painting handle, I can rotate it as well. I often forget, but, it's useful when I do remember. Just add a little bit more water, just so I'm going to wick some of that off. So there you go. So this is overloaded. Yeah, you see how the tip now is quite fat. That means there's too much liquid on that brush. Now when I go and paint that on my model, a lot of it's going to come out straight away. Now that may be your intention. Generally it's not. So if it ever happens like that, just get a bit of kitchen towel, wick it off, and your brush tip is back where it needs to be. And then you can just load it up with a little bit more paint. Yeah, and you're back to a nice fine point. Right, so just under his arm, well, it is under his arm, I suppose, is the top of his knee that's missing a bit of paint, and then just round the back here as well. Across the back of his jacket, even though you can't see it very well, I just want to get that in there. Another thing, I cannot easily see underneath him where his jacket is hanging down. You can see it's black from here. Yeah, don't bother painting that. Your mini's going to be on the table like that. No one is picking your minis up and going, oh, you've not painted under here. Yeah, save yourself some time. Don't worry about it. Yeah, for your HQs, and those centerpiece models, yeah, you might want to spend more time on them because invariably they're bigger, they're more detailed, and you'll want to take pride in those because they're usually quite expensive, and you tend to only have one of them on the board, or a few at most, not dozens like these guys. So another tip, when you're block painting and you want to know, like at the moment I'm cleaning these ones up, and originally you can't really see it from here, but I had them all lined up along here, yeah, when they were just primed. When I put the base coat on, I then moved them to the side here, so they were all running on the right hand side of me, and then as soon as I've touched them back up again, I've put them back up on the top again, and then that way I can see immediately which ones I've actually gone round and cleaned up and which ones I haven't, because at this stage it's very easy to overlook what you need to do and which ones have actually had those cleanup strokes added to them. So let's just clean this back up again. There we go. Look around here. So I'm not going to paint underneath his jacket, but I am going to paint the trim around here. And as you can see, oh look, I forgot his leg. So we'll put that in place now. There we go. Now I can see in this bit here under his leg. So I am going to paint in there. I'm not going to take too much effort to it, but I'm just making sure. And I can see under here as well. So I'm just going to go in there, just put a little bit of paint down. Nothing too special, just so it takes that edge off. Yeah, and then looking up at his back here, I can see there's some work needs to be done there. Just at the top of his shoulder here. So a little bit too much paint on there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go back to my palette. I'm going to twist the brush, just gently dabbed onto the palette, twist it slightly, paint's back off. So I'm going to turn him upside down because I think it's going to be easier control. Don't be afraid to use your hands to clamp him in position so that you can use him as a bridge. So here, so I'm bridging my hands on top of each other, and my elbows are planted on my workbench. So now I have much better control to put my brush in there and pull my stroke down. It flayed slightly, that was a bit annoying, but now I'm just going to do his back here as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it from here. There you go. See, so I'm keeping my hands bridging, and then it means I bring the brush across. Can't see that, sorry, I pulled it away from the screen. When I bring it across like that, I've got much more control. Yeah, there we go. And then just up his back here and down. Now you could argue that, you know, the same advice goes for painting underneath them. You know, crikey, who's really going to see that? That one was a little bit more obvious for me, you know, so it made sense to actually pick that up. Also, the top of his jacket here, we can see it here. So I am going to paint into here, so we've got it blocked out. I'm not too worried if I hit his gas mask or his gas line, and the inside of his arm here is still missing a bit of paint as well. So it's just coming around and cleaning these bits up, and this is going to take a little while, you know, but it allows us to clean it up. You know, just sort of roll it around and just have a look, see where you think you may need to add a little bit of paint. Okay, so I'm gonna, he looks okay to me. Oh, just one last look, just under there for his leg. Again, you know, we don't really need to do this bit, but I thought I might. Okay, so he looks okay. So we're going to stick him back over there. And the next one up, one of our friends with his bayonet. When you've got figures like this, you need to be doubly careful that you concentrate on where these little bits are, because they will snap off. You know, with the higher production value now from GW, there are tiny little details on the models that are quite fragile and easy to break. So you just need to keep an eye on those just while you're moving around. So you can see I just sort of come through here, paint down. Oh, another one that I missed, another leg. So I've overloaded the brush just slightly because I've got this area here that I need to paint into. And I'm going to bring the paint across to here. Just make sure that edge there is done. And then I'm going to paint up his leg. And we're just going to paint down here. Brush a bit of a clean. Now you can't see it because obviously it would look a bit weird having, you know, all my water and kitchen towel and everything on the screen. It kind of detracts from what we're doing, but I can assure you I have got a little piece of kitchen towel to my right that I clean the excess off of, And then I have 2 water jars. So I have one, in actual fact, I'm a big fan of Doritos salsa. So I have one jar that is for metallic paints, and I also have metallic specific brushes. Weirdly enough, they are the Monument Hobbies Pro Acryl. Oh, where are we? There we go. Monument Hobbies Pro Acryl Sable brushes. I think they call them, which ones are these? Are they Depth Charge or something like that? They've got some sort of explosion-y bomb type name. They're all right. They took a little while to break in. I tend to use them for metallics. And I keep a pot, a water pot specifically for metallics. And then I've got another water pot, which is the one that I use for ordinary paints. Now I sometimes have a third pot, which is just clean water, which is useful if you are trying to dilute your paint on your palette, and you've been using a lot of dark colours, and then you switch over to some light ones, because obviously you run the risk of putting dirty dark water in your lighter colours, and that can actually discolour them, or at least change the colour that you were hoping to work with. And this is most annoying if you've already been painting something and you're coming back to it and you accidentally pollute your paint, and you paint it on, and all of a sudden you've got an area of your model that has a completely different colour or slight shade variant to the one that you originally put down. So now let's just paint under here. Now again, you can avoid a lot of this stuff here. You don't have to paint all this stuff. There is a lot of detail on here that you can kind of bypass if you really want to. It's entirely up to you. But I find painting quite therapeutic. So I like to take my time sometimes. I'm not going to tell you you can paint these minis, in 15 minutes. Because, it's just not a thing, That's not 15 minutes like, oh, let's start stopwatch, and 15 minutes later this guy's painted. Whenever you see those types of videos, that's 15 minutes over a period of 8 hours, something like that, letting it dry, already knowing the colour schemes you're going to use, already having prepped and tested, and done at least 1 or 2 test models. To make sure that the colours and the techniques that you're going to talk about work the way that you expect them to. Not knocking it, just being realistic about it. So and you can paint them quicker. I'm not a fast painter. Like I say, I enjoy the actual act of painting. So I like to take my time with it. Fortunately, I have a gaming group that have no problem whatsoever if you want to play with unpainted minis. So there is no massive rush to have everything quickly painted the day it arrives and on the battle on the table. It's nice if you can do it, but the vast majority of us actually have jobs and other commitments, family, whatever it may be, that means we can't hobby as much as we like, so we have to catch that 15 minutes here, half an hour there, you know. And just take it as we find it. Oops, pulled it off camera again. I do apologise. Getting used to this positioning stuff. Anyway. The one thing you will find is the further you progress through a batch of minis, the quicker certain steps become. You know, like this touch-up process is moving along quite rapidly. Around the back of his neck. There's a bit at the top of his arm there. There we go. So let's just check his arm. Missed a cuff. If you're wondering why there's sort of flashes of white on a lot of these models, it's because originally I did prime them in white. Well, primed them black and then gave them a zenithal. But to be honest, I then did a test model on one that was completely black and made the conscious decision of quickly repriming all of these to black to make sure that they stay fairly uniform. I have the luxury of an airbrush, so repriming things doesn't take too long. Or priming in general, really. Just paint onto that. We're going to do the black bits in a minute. Yep, it looks okay. Off he comes. Well, the last two, both kneeling. These should be fairly easy to clean up. I think they were pretty easy to get to begin with. There we go. Just around the back of his helmet. We'll do the front of his jacket there. We can see it, so I am going to put a little bit of paint here. And I'm going to reach in through here and put a bit of paint on as well. There we go. And then what we'll do is we can just tidy up around here. Make sure back there is covered. Now he does have some straps here, but we'll clean those up in a minute. Let's just check the rest of him. The problem with the blue-black, as lovely a colour as it is that even with fairly bright lights, it's still quite dark. And look, there, missed that bit on his knee. So we'll just add that in there, and boom. Right. So I think that's all of it. No, we're just missing. Let's have a look at this. That's a strap, but that is the inside of his shoulder there. Just there. The strap we can pick back out again in a minute. There's also another one that is here. Oh, sorry. So there is a strap here and there's one just there, so we can pick those back out in a minute. Just look on the inside of this arm. Oh, right. So I think he's looking okay. So we'll just lift him off. Do this guy. And the overall aim here is basically, in a couple of hours you can get a rudimentary tabletop ready, paint job done across a unit of your guardsmen, give or take. Yeah. So right, where are we on these guys? So here, let's make sure we've painted this one here, and then this one here. Just go behind, and there we go. A little bit more paint, not much. Bit of water. Perfect. Let's wick that off of the ferrule. Just do that one there. That comes down under here. We can see a little bit of his jacket here, so I'll just give that a bit of, like I say, it's the largest part, so if we cover that off when we come to clean up around it, we should be fine. There's a little hair caught on there. Let me just grab a pair of tweezers and let's get that off. And the last thing you want is a hair sticking to your. There we go. Right. Let's just check. Hasn't left any bits behind. There is just a little bit there. Come on. There we go. I know. Yeah. No one's going to be able to see it, but I saw it. So I'll get rid of it. Right, let's just give him one more quick check under his armpit there. And just inside of here. Right. Let's just do this. Yeah, he looks okay. So now we can start on the black. Let's just refresh our memory of our test model. In actual fact, before we start on the black, we'll start and do his jacket lining here. So what would be the internal liner? Because we've still got this paint. And also do his cuffs. I even think that his actual collar is the same as well. So what we'll do is we're just going to take a little bit. In fact, let's Let's pull this across. So, just going to put some water on here. Yeah, I'm just going to drag some of that from here to here. Pull some of this paint across. We'll make our light blue. And there we go. So that's what we're going to use for the inside of our jackets. So let's grab one of these guys. There we go. So they're all pretty much the same. They have this folded over piece of the jacket pinned up. And that comes down to here. There we go. And it comes over his knee here to here. And then we have another piece folded over here. And then we're going to do his cuffs. So they're both lifted up, and then we're going to do his collar. So I know we've already painted this collar once, but it comes back to what I was saying earlier, that if we happen to slightly miss a bit, it's not going to stick out as starkly as it would if it was still black underneath. Okay, so there you go. So you can see him. And while it may look quite bright at the moment, it will knock back as it dries. Right. So, in actual fact, while we're here, we might as well put in some highlights. So let's just, oops, a daisy, that was a little bit brutal. But what I can do is I can quickly feather this bit out. And yeah, I'm just going to come down that edge just to sort of lift it up slightly. Again on this bit here. Yeah, so we've got the crease here. We've also got the crease here. Right, so we'll work on that crease there. Right. Just a little bit stippling there. And then going to do a little bit on the jacket there. And then we can do the same with the trousers. So we just do a little bit up the leg. Yeah. Just take it across, back down again. We're just trying to lift this. Take it up to his knee. His inner thigh. Bring a bit across from there as well. And then we can knock this back later if we need to. Yeah, but now you can see bring him up. See his jacket. Now you have a look at that leg compared to this one here. Admittedly, the other one is bent underneath, so it's not going to have quite so much in the way of highlights, but we can still add just a little bit around the knee. Yeah, like that. And then just off to the edge, like that. Yeah, when we do the same on his arms, I'm not going to because I've just spotted I missed some there. So, but we'll do this arm. Yeah, take it off to the point of his elbow. And that. And that. And that. Yeah. There's a bit there as well. And then just a little bit here. I'm just going to stipple there slightly. There we go. And then what we'll do with this one is we'll lighten it down even more to add the creases into here so that we get that definition back again. First things first, though, I'm going to clean my brush. And I'm going to fix that arm. So let's get that arm done. That's painted correctly. Okay, so that's done. Now, just going to go back in here and just punch out that bit in the middle there. Yeah, bring that down. Yeah, and then a bit clean up here. Yeah. And a little bit of clean up here. There we go. And what we can do is we can basically just take this right the way down to there. And then right, so like I said, let's get a little bit lighter and then we can do the flaps at the front as well. So we've already got our paint here. I'm going to take this down again, so then we've got something that's much lighter. Okay, so this, let's have a look at this, see if this is light enough or whether it's too light. Yep. Have a look. Oops, daisy. I can clear that bit up in a sec. A little bit too high. There we go. A couple of bits just need to be cleaned up there. Oof. Right, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to water this down a little bit. Just do a little bit of blending here to try and clean it up a little bit, drag it out. Yeah. We can come back in and clean this anyway. Yeah, so we just need to clean those back up, which is fine. So we'll do that now. So there we go. Just going to take this out. Then we'll do the same here. So we're going to clean this up here. Just bring it down. And then this one here. There. Much better. What we can do, go back in and we can actually tidy these up a little bit more. Why, thank you very much, Mr. Bishop. It's very kind of you. I do enjoy a bit of Krieg as well myself. Glad you could join. So, like I was saying, we're just going to tidy these up a little bit. And if you're holding it, looking at the light, you can actually see where those highlighted lines should be. So I'm going to just put one just across the top of here, and then we're going to just clean it out a little bit. Yeah. This one's going to be quite thin because I actually just want slight colour change. Much, just enough. So we'll just put that into there and pull that across. There we go. So there's still a little bit of a rough line there. So if I just bring that across here, I can tidy this up a bit better then. And then this line here, we can pull this back a bit if we want. But, you know, we don't want to noodle too much because, like I said before, you know, these are basically just your bread and butter units. And you really want to be spending your time on your high quality models instead. You know, those one-offs. So, now this arm is dried, I can highlight it up a little bit. So we'll just grab some paint here. Again, we're just going to go in just a little bit of paint on here and this elbow area here, just to give him a bit of a line. It's going to have a little line across the top of here as well, and it's going to stipple down. We'll just take it under his elbow slightly, and then while it's still wet, I can actually just go back in and just punch that line back out again. And add a little bit of better definition there. Just take it off. Nothing special. So now we've sort of noodled with that a bit. Let's actually switch over and add another actual colour. We'll do the black towards the end. So the next thing I'm going to do is his gaiters, and I'm going to put on the initial base colour around his gas mask, and of course the bedroll as well. So for that, we're going to use Pro Acryl's dark green brown. I'll just give it a quick shake. Right, let's get some of this out on the palette. There we go. Now this is actually a very dark colour, but what it allows us to do is then come back in and line it up using our dark ivory, and then I'll wash, like I said before, with a bit of contrast paint, good old skeleton horde, just to knock it back again. So now we've got these bad boys here. Let's start on the gaiters. So first thing to do, load up the brush, get a little bit of water on it. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to follow the gaiters round. And this is, as you can see, it's a little bit on the watery side because it's a lighter colour to the black. So I don't want to overload it just to get a single layer of paint on there, because you run the risk of basically losing detail. This way we can just get it on there, and we can come back in to put another, whoops, and as he hit the base there, we can put another layer on in a minute. Because while these are drying, obviously we can move on to the gas mask. Now obviously underneath the jacket can be a little bit awkward, but again, we've not done the boots yet, so don't worry if you end up covering the boots or getting a little bit of overpaint, because we can tidy that up afterwards. Right, we're going to have to be a little bit more precise with the mask, just purely because it's slap bang in the middle of his head and we've already painted some stuff around here, but it's not too difficult. So now it's up to you whether you want to paint around the little eye lenses or whether you want to just paint over them. I tend to just paint over the whole thing because I come back in later and use some of that stonewall grey to put in the base for the lens before I actually paint it. So just get that in there. Paint around here again, don't worry too much if it looks a bit watery. It's a bit hard to see the detail just because of the way the shape of the head. You can get a bit of shadow as well on there, even with good lighting. And we'll just leave him to dry for a second. As you can see, this one is practically dry now, so we can come back in a second or three and clean that up. While I'm just waiting for it to finish drying off, I'm just going to go around to make sure everything else is painted up. So now the good thing about the gaiters is that it doesn't matter too much if you can see a bit of that black through, because once we put the dark ivory highlight on and then go over it with the skeleton horde, it kind of knocks it back for you. Now when it comes to the mask, we are going to use the dark ivory again to actually paint it in so that we end up with our base colour. And if you haven't seen the test model, here he is. Let's move him out of the way. so his face is quite stark. We haven't done the lenses or anything for them yet. That's probably going to be another session. If we can get just the base blocking in for these guys, then we've got 8-9 of them to get through. So we're going to do the bedroll, and that'll give us a bit more time. And then once we've got through all of these, we can come back to those gaiters and start to highlight them up. And we can highlight these up a little bit as well. So being a little bit more precise here, just around the back of the Krieg Guardsman himself, just to make sure I don't splodge something down his collar. Now, you probably can't see it particularly well here, but on the Krieg's backpack, let's switch him around to the other side, you'll probably be able to see it better there if I catch the light. On the Krieg's backpack, where his bedroll is, there's actually a securing strap, and then you can just see the bottom of the bedroll again, which is just here. Yeah, and the bedroll is there. So we're going to do our best to avoid it, but again, accidents happen. If you need to overpaint it afterwards, then so be it. It's not the end of the world. I'm just going to go in there, make sure he's got a bit of paint on there, so we at least see it, don't forget it. Just going to give these guys a little bit more. Paint that bottom of the bedroll. There we go. Now, just going to come down here because you can see it from over his shoulder. So we'll just give it a little bit of a dab. Right, now let's come back to our gaiters. So let's do these ones. Back round again. Again, you can't see these particularly well, so as long as you've got a little bit of paint on them so that they provide a visual indication that they are going around his ankles, you don't need to worry about it too much more than that. If you want to go in and be more detailed, feel free, but in all honesty, once it's on the table and you're staring at it over your cup of tea while you're waiting for your opponent to move his 1,000 Kriegsmen across the board, you're not going to notice it. Cool. Now, if you look at the helmet now, his gas mask, you can see that has actually evaporated. So let's actually pick the detail back up again. And again, just need to be a little bit careful. I'm going to avoid the eyes a little bit this time. Just pick up those areas where the paint would have pulled away from the first time round. So underneath his cheekbones and around the muzzle of the actual mask. As you can see here, you can see where it's pulled away from it. So we're just going to reinstate that. We don't need to do too much more than this because obviously we're going to paint over it. So let's just go over the muzzle and then just down the bridge of his nose. The lens areas we can kind of leave. Just going to pick that bit out and then we'll go to the backpack. If you have any questions, please do chuck them in the chat. I am glancing up occasionally. And I will endeavour to answer any questions you have. I just pull that in, pull that one in. Right, okay, so he's almost dry now. From where it was going from one unit to another, we've kind of stuck on this one to add some more detail to him. While I'm waiting for that to dry a bit more, I'm going to paint the butt of his rifle, which I'm using warm brown. I'm just going to put some of this out. We don't need a huge amount of this because there's not a great deal of brown on the Kriegsmen. If you want to paint their harnesses in brown, or then go for it. I tend to flip-flop between whether or not they need to be brown or whether I want them to be black. But if nothing else, I'm going to do the butt. No butt jokes, please. Now, a lot of these guys, the butt can be quite obscured, or it can be down the side of their body. So, like before, just take your time here and reposition your hands and your brush so that you can get in there and reduce the risk of clipping anything. And there we go. We don't have to get too close, because if you're a bit worried about accidentally painting on something else, you can always apply a wash over the top of this. Maybe a Seraphim Sepia or some form of brown wash, just to knock that back and just take the edge off of the black of the primer. But it's entirely up to you. So for the straps and the body plate here, which just spotted, I've missed his chest buttons and front of his jacket. So let's just quickly fix that. There we go. Right. So this is where it becomes a little bit tricky. Let's move it over so you can see this a bit better. So yeah, so inside here, we've got the top of his jacket. So I'm just going to move this around to try and pick up that area just so that it falls in line with everything else. I've also spotted that the line down his arm there to the underside of his jacket. There we go. Right. So we won't do his straps yet. We'll leave him for a moment. So let's do the blacking of the boots and the helmet and the pads. Now, if you've never used pro acrylic paints, they tend to be very matte. It's not quite so evident with the black blue. That seems to be a slightly satin paint, but you'll notice it immediately when I actually put this coal black on, because it will knock back the helmet almost immediately as soon as it starts to dry. So we'll do his helmet. Just get down the back. There we go. Now as that starts to dry, it will go quite matte. Now if you're going to mix your paints, like I have been doing, and I don't mean literally, I mean if you're mixing your paint manufacturers, then the one thing you will probably want to consider is putting on a unifying layer generally like a satin varnish or something like that, to basically seal the entire model, but also to make sure that all of the paints themselves have a uniform reflective nature. Now you may not want that because you're looking for a specific effect, and you know, that's cool, but you also may find that certain paints just look odd when applied to certain aspects of your model if they dry with a different level of reflectiveness. So I know his boots are in the ground here and they are black to begin with, but we are going to cover them back up again. Now if you are going to cover your model in some form of varnish, be aware that it can have potentially undesirable side effects on metallics. And what you might find with a lot of painters, and this is entirely up to you how you want to do this, but a lot of painters will actually leave the metallics until after they've put some form of varnishing coat on, so that they can still keep the reflectiveness of it. Personally, don't use a huge amount of metallic paint or in large areas, so I'm not really that fussed about it. For the gloves, I'm going to make them black, and the armor plate that's actually on the back of the glove I'm going to make black as well. And what we can do with this is we can actually lift up the plates just by highlighting them differently to the gloves later on. For the gun, I'm going to paint over it just to knock it all back. You can see immediately if you look at the helmet now just how dull the helmet looks, and this side panel, so this shoulder pad here, it's a very lackluster compared to the shininess of this one. So I'm just going to go over the whole of this gun with the Pro-Acryl coal black, just to give it a uniform cover. And then I'm going to do the gloves and the armor plate that's under here, and also the back of this gun here, just on the inside, because we are missing a little bit of primer here from when it was zenitholed. And if you look underneath there, you can see when how it was originally zenitholed. And as I say, because this paint scheme was actually applied to a black test model, I reprimed all of these just to make it easier. Okay, and we'll just do the actual stock butt of the gun. Just make sure it's cleaned up. Clean that up. There we go. Right. Oh, and we still got this shoulder pad to do. So just to do that. Oh, bit too much paint there. Let's take it off. Now we will clean this up around here. And again, just off the shoulder here. And then we've got the bottom plate that just extends underneath it. There we go. Right, so let's just do the edge of that shoe. Okay, so now we've got the gun has effectively been touched up. I'm sure I'll spot some bits that I've missed on it, but they'll be easy to see because they'll still be satin and not matte. So the next thing that I'm going to do, which will probably, we've got about 20 minutes left. Just touch that up slightly, make sure that's around there. Next thing we'll do is we will layer up those gaiters. So let's just, now as I say, we're going to use the dark ivory for this. I'm going to give it a quick shake. I'll just pull up a bit down on my palette. This, compared to a lot of the other Pro Acrylic paints, is quite thick. You tend to find that with paints when they have lighter pigments, especially if they've got a proportion of white in them. They tend to be a lot thicker. As I understand it, it's because the minerals used to make white paint are actually a lot larger than other colours. But then again, I could be talking out of my hat. Okay, so let's just take a little bit off of that brush. So all we're going to do here is we're just going to go over those top edges that we can see here. Don't worry if you split it like that. Again, we can come back and just clean that up. Oh dear. A little bit more water, I feel. Not quite as flowing as I'd hoped. Right, let's try again. So, let's just go around the back of here. There we go. Right. I know I've said it a few times this evening, but you know, there's nothing that can't be fixed, paint-wise. Just takes a little bit of time, that's all. Oof. Right, yeah, I'm making an absolute dog's behind of that. I really need to just thin this down a lot more. Right. Even if you know your paint, it can still catch you out sometimes. Right. That's better. Much better. It doesn't get over the fact the rest of it looks like ass, but okay. So let's just, yeah, see, now I've got the thickness right. Much better. Right, we're going to have to clean this side up. As you can see, so look, on that side it went on nicely once I'd thinned it down properly. And this side, unfortunately, not so much. So, but that's not to worry. We can go back to our dark green brown, and we can re-establish those lines. You know. There we go. That's a bit better. Let's just get in here if we can. Just through there and through there. That'll do us. Now we can do a little bit of highlighting on the top, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to mix a little bit of the dark ivory with the green brown. just so that we've got something that's a little bit knocked back slightly. Looks a bit like grubby canvas, if that's something that you can envisage. It sounds pretty seedy, to be honest. But so again, what we're going to do is we're just going to sort of try and bring some of this up slightly. I'm not too worried about it being super clean, because I want those folds to still be there. So I'm just kind of dabbing around a little bit just to bring it up. The model does actually have a little bit of detail sort of here. You can see it there. And then there's a couple of sort of little creases here and here. So we can dab around and just sort of paint that up. Because it's meant to be cloth, it doesn't need to be, you know, as smooth. You can use the brush to sort of provide you with some of that texture when it dries. Let's just push through that, and we'll paint through this one like so. You can see it's already gone to that sort of scruffy brown there. Well, colour me stupid, I've missed the bit in the middle, the actual centre of the bedroll. So let's rectify that. I'm sorry if I keep moving the model off screen. So first things first, let's paint the centre bit here. We're going to have to give it a couple of coats just to make sure that's established. Right. Go around those straps. And again, those straps will, on my test model, I made the backpack blue. But I'm still probably going to paint the straps on the top brown, and the packing straps around the sides brown as well. I may even paint it brown. Haven't quite decided yet, but we'll see. Okay, so that's almost dry. The other advantage of having fairly thin paint, and it being this time of the year where everybody's got their central heating on, is that the paint tends to dry very quickly. So let's just finish that through there. Clean the brush off. While we're waiting for that, I'm going to put this brush down a sec. I'm going to grab a slightly bigger brush. I've got a size 2 here, and we'll use this contrast paint to knock back our gaiters now. So again, if you've never used contrast paint, it's got a very low viscous nature to it, so it spreads itself out very easily. You've got to be careful for pooling, but it's effectively semi-transparent. So what it kind of, think of it like shade wash on steroids. It's very good if you're using it on light colours, because it will add that sort of colour filter over the top for you. with relatively little effort. So there you can see his gaiters are now knocked back. And we can actually do these side parts of the bedroll as well while we're waiting. Just pull those back down. And then we'll paint the centre. One thing to be careful of with contrast paints is coffee staining. It pools very easily if you're not too careful. So you've just got to be mindful to wick away any excess with a damp brush. Right, let's just put that out of the way so that I don't knock it over. I'll leave it open for a sec because we're just going to quickly layer up the top of this bedroll, and then we can give it a few seconds to dry. And then we can put the contrast paint over the top just to knock it back finally and fill into those sort of recesses for us. And while we wait for that just to dry off, we'll take our pure dark ivory and we'll just do the Guardsman's gas mask. So I mean, this is a very, I'm not going to say chalky, it's not really chalky, but you can certainly feel a higher level of resistance when you're painting with it, if that makes any sense. And it's not unique to Pro Acryl. You know, Citadel's whites are very much like this, and they're light shades. You know, Zandri dust and things like that tend to have a very draggy feel to them. The thing you've just got to be mindful with them is that they can dry very fast, especially if you've got central heating on, so you run the risk of getting chalky residue. You just got to be a little bit careful with them. So if in doubt, if you have to go back in to something like this, just give it a dab. Don't try and reinstate it with another brush stroke because it will take it off. Right, so the last thing that we've got to do is slate light on the top here. And we'll grab some of this contrast paint. And then I think that will be it for this evening. And we can continue maybe some Krieg artillery next week. There we go. So what we'll do is we'll finish these guys off in the next hobby session of painting with friends, and then we can start looking at all the big weapons, the artillery and the heavy weapons groups. But yeah, hopefully that's been helpful. Thanks for stopping by. If you've stuck out here to the very end, I appreciate it. Thanks for joining me for my maiden live stream. And if you like what's, we're doing, and you enjoy a bit of banter, then please do like and subscribe. And hopefully I'll see you on the next one. Take care.